I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we are talking to Alan Scher. He is the author of an important literary work called Death of a Nightingale. Alan, thanks for joining us here today.
Great pleasure to be with you.
Your book addresses something that a lot of popular culture does not, and specifically that is special education and the school system. Tell me why you chose to write about this topic.
Well, I got myself involved very much by accident. Essentially, I belong to the Rotary Club of Sunderland. And there I met a guy called Fredwin Haynes, who was the head teacher of the Barbara Priestman School in Sunderland. And that was a special school for kids with a physical disability and a learning difficulty. And he invited me to be a governor of the school. And prior to that, I had no experience whatsoever, no knowledge of special educational needs. It was a brand new experience for me. And I go along, I'm now retired from my business life, and I really am gobsmacked by this school. It is an absolutely wonderful school. It takes me over. I see the kids enjoying themselves. I see them learning. I go to the presentation evenings at the school, and everybody seems to be winning something. I see some of the kids, and they're remarkable, and I can talk about that later on today. But there's one in particular, Ashley Ritchie, which I'll mention later on, and she is a friend to this day, and that's many years later. But I'm taken over by everything about this school. And I think you've got some pictures which show what a great school it is. Well, now, I'm a governor, and then I become chair of governors, and no problem at all. And then the flavor of the times is to close it. And it's done under the banner of what's called inclusion. And there is this belief that the kids would be better off if they were in mainstream and have an equal opportunity to go to university. Well, in fact, no one wanted that to happen because they're very happy with it as it was. And the director of well, actually, what happened was the head teacher retired, and the director of education comes along, and he says, "Well, we're going to close you down so all you kids can go to mainstream schools." Well, I was at the parents' meeting when that happened, and I said to a parent governor, who was again a friend to this day, Trish George, I said, "Look, ask for a vote." So the guy put it to the vote. Not one hand went up in favor. Well, I tell you, that didn't stop them wanting to close the school, because the flavor of the times, not just in the UK, but worldwide, actually, because this was an international movement. There was an agreement called the Salamanca Agreement or something that said that these schools should be closed. And in the UK, 100 schools were closed at this time. Anyway, the parents decided that they did not like the idea of this at all. And I was able to help them mount a campaign to fight that proposal. We were very lucky. The local newspaper was very supportive of it as well. And I had a thought, really, that a petition wasn't a good idea because petitions could be shredded. I said what you should do is to get reasoned objections because they're less shreddable. Well, they got over 10,000 reasoned objections to closure, and they presented these to the minister, and the minister turned the closure down, but it still didn't want them stopping to close the school. And they starved the school of money, and they starved the school of pupils. And so it was quite a campaign to keep the school open. Ultimately, they agreed to keep it open, but after I left, it's now a school for autistic kids rather than for the kids who were there at the time. Yeah. But the battle was actually, I mean, no local authority likes to be attacked in the way we attacked them. And so it was quite a raw battle. And I was protesting hither and thither my way. Tried the local government ombudsman, I tried Ofsted, I tried the audit commission at one stage, and I got nowhere. Now you asked me, why did I write the book? Well, I wrote the book, and I wrote well, it's as you probably know, it's a play in a book. I wrote the play in the book as a protest because I thought it was really the only way I could put into the public domain the things that I felt were important about education and the things that I learned really while all this was going on. And in fact, my learning has continued to this day because I feel, although it's a long time since I've been to school and it's a long time since I've been in any schoolroom, but I keep in touch with the teachers that I met at the time and they keep me informed. And I've got a feel for what is going on today. And I think that I've got something which is useful to say. And I think I just really want to put it into the public domain. And that's why I wrote the book and why I actually wrote the play, which is at the heart of the book, was to try to put on the stage the mood and character of that particular school. That's what is within it, if you see. Anyway, I've spoken too much already. So
no, you've absolutely succeeded in your goal of putting real life characters out there before the public. And I think it's very, very important that people see that certain subsections of the human race might fare better when they're educated amongst themselves rather than other groups. And I guess this is why, in many cases, you oppose inclusion and think these special needs schools as standalones are a more effective form of education.
Well, I obviously feel that, but I feel something more now as time has gone by. For my sins, I used to take the Times Educational Supplement. So I see, we're reading that over the years, that there's a lot of disturbance in schools. Things aren't good in schools. They're forever saying that kids are unruly. And I know there's a lot of use of Ritalin today in schools. And I suddenly realized that what I'm saying doesn't just apply to kids with special educational needs. Just think around this, that if you say to people, you said to me for that matter a while ago, what's the purpose of education? Well, you'd say, well, equality of opportunity to go to university. That's what everybody should have, an equality of opportunity to go to university. The fact is that only half the kids are going to go to university. Now, so you're giving kids an opportunity to fail to get to university when you really think about it. And you're giving them a curriculum that gears them up to go to university, but they may want a different life altogether outside university. And there are a lot of advantages in having that life outside university. I mean, part of my life, as you may know, has been in retail. And I've met an awful lot of people who've had very good lives without having gone to university.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly in the United States here, there's a shortage of people who don't go to university.
That's right.
We need more craftsmen. We need more plumbers. We need more carpenters. We need more electrical workers. We need people who actually do things as opposed to people who just think about doing things.
Well, that's precisely the point that I'm making, that really there ought to be an alternative curriculum, an alternative route. It ought not to be simply one route, a mass-produced route for everybody to get a chance to go to university. Going to university is not the be-all and end-all of life anyway, as I've discovered myself. It's not a passport for life. People make it out sometimes that it is a passport for life. It wasn't a passport for life for me because my training in law really wasn't all that wonderful, even though I went to Oxford for it. I won't go into that here, but the fact is that there are lots and lots of ways in which you can have a successful, rewarding personal life yourself without touching university, or maybe having a year in a university with a top-up course, a language top-up course or something like that to facilitate the work that you're doing. But it doesn't need to be a 3-year course or a 4-year course. And it doesn't need to involve a student debt on your back for your life either, because that's an inhibition. And that's the other thing that I don't like at all, that there is this sort of philosophy about equality in education, that if everybody can't have a scholarship, nobody should have one. I mean, when I got to university with a state scholarship, but there are no state scholarships these days in the UK. Now you get a loan instead. And in my view, if you've got a loan for your life, it's not a good thing necessarily for you to have to live with. And anyway, I won't go into that, but it's just another dimension of what it is that I'm talking to you about.
Absolutely. In this country, we often say when these kids graduate with $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 in school debt, they're graduating with a mortgage, but no house over their head. I mean, they're really incurring a lot of debt. And you address this in your book. You talk about the difference between equity in education and equality. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, you see, what I discovered really was, I mean, as I say, my training was in law a long, long time ago, and jurisprudence, never mind law, the study of law. Now, I had a very wonderful lecturer called Herbert Hart at the time, and he explained to me how you had to be very careful how he used the word right. Sometimes it's something that's just desirable, sometimes it's something provided by law. Now, oddly enough, the one thing that he didn't deal with is the one thing that's actually critical, and that is what happens when one person's right conflicts with another person's right. Now, you keep finding this in life. Now, here you see, you had a situation where in the UK, the Parliament gave rights of children to go to university, to go to get to university. But they also gave rights to the parents to have a school of their choice for their kids. What happens when these two rights collide? Now, it's no good talking about equality at a time like that, because the word equality doesn't add up to anything. What is important is fair play. You want to pay fair play by the parents and fair play by the kids. And when you use the word fair play, or equity was the word that you used, then you can begin to find an answer, because you can then say, well, look, it looks to me as though in this instance, the parents and the kids and the teachers all want the kids to have a school of their own. Give it to them. Don't sort of say, well, somehow or other, they're all equal and therefore do it my way. I mean, that doesn't get anywhere at all. So the word equality, in my view, is a mischief word, because people look for it as a great sort of hope that everybody could be equal. Well, in fact, it's not even a good idea that everybody could be equal, because when you really, really think about it, we're equal only sometimes. We're not equal always. In fact, we're different always.
Exactly. We're equal under the law.
No.
There are smarter people. There are less smart people. There are athletic people. There are people like me who can't walk and chew gum at the same time.
Yeah. Well, this is it. I mean, the differences are more important than some notional equality. Sometimes when you're dealing with, let's say, religious rights or gender rights and things like that, well, equality is very important and you've got to allow for it. But there are other times that what's more important is the differences. And the other thing which is relevant to that, if you really think about it, in my working life, I came to see the enormous virtue in the pursuit of excellence. Now, it makes all the difference in the world when you've got situations that are excellent as against mediocre. But the danger of equality is that you begin to rate mediocrity, and you really got to pursue, in my view, excellence. And encourage people to. And excellence is not a question of money or anything like that. It's just a question of going for the best. And I think you see that Michelle Obama got it right when she came to the UK, and she was speaking, I think, to a girls' school, and she said to this girls' school, "Be the best you can be." Well, that's it, isn't it? And you don't think about be the best you can be and worry about whether it's equal to somebody else. You just be the best you can be. And you take another illustration, which I think was very much in the news, is that Raducanu, you know, when she won the American Open, she said the same thing: be the best you can be. Forget about things like parity of esteem and all the rest of it. I mean, that's so much ballyhoo, it's nonsense.
Absolutely.
The equality, parity of esteem. People go for parity of esteem, you know, between people who are good with their hands and people who are good with their brains. It's supremely irrelevant when you really think about it. just people should be the best they can be. End of story. Doesn't that make
Exactly.
sense?
Everybody has a potential within themselves, but fulfilling that potential within you is your
That's
goal, is
exactly
your
right.
journey. Somebody else will have a different goal and a different journey, and that's okay. And that's what makes this world unique, and that's what makes this world great.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
I'd
Anyway.
imagine one of the things, or one of the lessons you've learned in dealing with special needs children in the fight for their proper education is the power of government and how burdensome it can be when it's supposed to actually empower children and students like this. Tell me a little bit about that struggle and holding government accountable.
Well, the problem is that various ideas like inclusion, for example, become the flavor of the times. And everybody seems to want, they take, well, I use the phrase, wouldn't it be nice if idea. Everybody says, I mean, I've got this quote, if I can just show it to you.
Sure.
I mean, this is where, this illustrates what I'm getting at. This is a guy he was a liberal, not a socialist, he was a Lib Dem MP. And he said, working in Chapeltown in the late 1960s convinced me that unless we could educate the whole community together, wherever they came from, and whatever their needs and disabilities, frankly, we would breed dysfunctional communities. And it's a point of principle to me and my colleagues that inclusive education goes to the heart of the education system. Now, you see, that idea caught on. And everybody said, well, if it's a point of principle, you don't need to cost it. You don't need to work out the practicalities of it. If it's a point of principle, you've got to go for it. And the media went for it and so on. Any discordant voices are suppressed. Now, that was the problem, that when I tried to raise my voice in my little way, nobody wanted to know about it. I put a play on. I actually put the play on, first of all, as a rehearsed reading, and it was reported in the press and had a very good report on it. Once they realized what it was all about, they suddenly made themselves scarce, and they tried to kill it, if the truth be told, because this is the way the system works. But unfortunately, I use the word ratchet, that unfortunately something takes hold of society, and the media and the establishment latch onto something, and then they can't somehow admit they made a terrible mistake. They just keep bashing away, trying to make it work, and they keep having in the UK. They produce what are called green. The government produces green papers. They bring white papers when they want to do something. They produce green papers when they're lost. And they keep producing green papers and discussion papers. What should we do about this, that, and the other? Well, you know, it doesn't get anywhere because the problems are insuperable as they create them for themselves. But the problems go on. I mean, this one started in 1976. And here we are in 2022. Well, you know, it goes a long way to make a mistake before you decide you've made it. And that's the trouble with our society, that it's got this, what I call this ratchet, that prevents it going back and saying, do you think we possibly could have made a mistake? And this is part of the difficulty that we've got, not just here, but in other places as well, being able to go back and own up to a mistake and correct it. And the other trouble is that the people who ought to be looking at it that way around, and that's academia, they're the people who should be exploring these areas and they don't want to know. They just play the game the way they've always played it. And I mean, I've got this saying about myself, if you like. It makes me sound more literate than I am. It's a saying from T.S. Eliot that you end up where you started from and see it for the first time. And that's me, because of the experiences I've had in my life, that you end up where you started from. And I see it very differently now from the way I used to see it. But there are a heck of a lot of other people who see it exactly as they saw it for the first time. They don't change. They just stuck with a view that they had maybe in their teens. They've written it up or whatever it is, and they just stick with it. And they don't ever say, could we possibly have got it wrong? And Therein lies the problem, you see, and especially is it a problem with people who rely on books. I'm sorry to be a bit that way, but I had a very practical life, and it's when
Absolutely.
you see
It seems like diversity of opinion is kind of outlawed nowadays. There's only one opinion that's in style, and the rest are dismissed and put under some kind of ism, sexism, racism, some kind of discrimination.
well, it's worse than that because they get a little sound bite, and they rely on the sound bite. Whereas, in fact, the world is a good deal more complicated than they allow for. And, you know, well, I won't go into that, but certainly education is a very good example of that. You see, I've got a lot of time for a guy called Fred Robinson, Sir Fred Robinson. He emigrated from the UK to America, I suspect, because he found the climate of opinion in the UK not very well disposed towards him. Now, I've picked up a lot of information from Fred Robinson's talks on television, which you can pick up yourself. And I urge, I've got a note of one of them, which you should look at. It's actually TED Talks on April 2013. And he explains there exactly what I believe very strongly, but he's doing it from the inside. I'm doing it from the outside, if you like, but he's doing it from the inside. And so Fred Robinson there, he uses a lovely example, which I think is a beautiful example. He talks about Death Valley, which apparently is the hottest place on earth in America or something. It's dry and arid and so on. And he describes how in 2004, there was 7 inches of rain. Mm. In 2005, there was a garden of flowers. And he says, well, you see, this is nature. The people, you know, the flowers were waiting to grow. It wasn't that it was Death Valley, it was just dormant. Now, this same thing applies to education. This was his basic stance, if you like, that the creativity is there, the talent is there, but it's not dead, it's dormant. And what the challenge to education is to allow it to flourish and to grow. But unfortunately, his view was that it's so busy trying to create the world in its own ideas that it doesn't allow for that to happen naturally. In fact, has the exact opposite to the desired effect, you see. So that's where he comes from, and I go along with it. I think he's right. I think he's spot on.
Absolutely. Tell me about the title, Death of a Nightingale. What does that refer to, and how did you come up with it?
Well, you see, in my play is a tragedy. Because the play is about the destruction of a special school. And I put on the stage the school that I've actually seen, and I have a narrator for it, who is Tracy, and she, in my view, is Ashley Ritchie, now Ashley Watt, because that's where I got my inspiration for that character from. And I put in the play a music lesson as well, because music was very strong in the school. They had a steel drum band, which was in huge demand around the place, and played in national theatres as well as local ones. Anyway, I put on the stage the play about this school, and the story is very simple, that the local authority wants to close it, as they did with Barbara Priestman's school, but nobody in the school wanted it to happen. So in this instance, and it's fictional, you see, in this instance, this play is this way round, that they turn to the head and they say, look, you must cooperate with us and take our side. And she says, no, I don't want to do that, because that's your job, not my job. And they twist her arm, and finally she says she will. But then she confesses to her partner, who's also a teacher at the school, that this is what's going on. She says, I can't do it. And she tries to take her own life. And that is the halfway stage in the play. The second half of the play works out what happens after that. And I'm afraid ultimately the school is closed and the bulldozer is called in. And that's the play. So it's really what happened 100 times over in the UK, that a lot of people wanted these schools kept open, but the pressures were brought to bear on people and the schools were closed. And that's how I wrote my play, and that's why I wrote my play, because I wanted to show that that is how the system can work, that at times politics gets in the way of education, because people think they know best when they don't. I think I sometimes put it this way. A lot of people in life generally think that what is right for them is right for everybody else. You know?
Yes, absolutely.
I don't know, would you agree with that? You see, they think that because something is right for them, it must be right for everybody, and it's not true. It isn't true. This is an important way I try to get it across to people, that they shouldn't presume. It's a bit arrogant to think that what is right for you is right for everybody else when it isn't. And so that's what influenced my writing the play. I actually saw it quite a few times myself, because we had the theatre, having put it play on, didn't really enthuse about it. They actually put another play on before it to sell to their own audience. So that's the sort of world I was living in at the time. You may find that very strange, but they did do just that. And the Stage magazine hired a political lefty in order to say that it was a terrible play. But this was the world that I was living in, and the media never reported it at all. So I had to go myself and encourage my friends to go to the play in order to make sure there's an audience there for it. Well, this is the world I lived in at the time. But, there we are. That's the way it is. And it's not good.
It seems like everything nowadays is polarized and politicized. Whether you're on the left or the right or in the center, I think everybody has the same goal when it comes to children, and that is to educate them the best way possible. And there are going to be different theories and approaches when it comes to that process. And having an intellectual conversation about it is what having a republic and a democracy and a capitalistic society is supposed to be all about. Yet nowadays we are labeled and we are derided and we are vilified if we don't go along with just one line of thought.
I agree with you entirely about that. As I say, I've got these friendships which go back now 20, 30 years. And there's a particular lady, she's now retired. She was a teacher at Barbara Priestman School. She became the head teacher of a school in Gateshead, a special school. And we met up at the marriage of a girl that was her pupil called Ashley Ritchie. She is still very, very close to Ashley. Now, she is a person who informs me about education, or one of the people informs me about it. And when I listen to her, I realize that you're not dealing with something that's easy. I mean, you shouldn't come to quick answers when it comes to education. What she was explaining to me was about classroom disorder and discipline and so on. She said, you've got to see this over a span of time, if you really think about it. There was a time when parents used to discipline their kids. And then you get a new era when you get single parent families very often, women looking after their kids, and they're on their own as well. And the feeling is that kids should be allowed to express themselves openly, but then they express themselves maybe too much. And then you get a certain amount of disorder. And then you get a pressure for discipline and order, or the substitute for it. And that's how you come to get Ritalin being in demand in order to solve a problem. But that's using medication in order to deal with a problem that is caused by some other source. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't sometimes use Ritalin, but there are other occasions where you shouldn't use it at all, because it's really a fault of the educational system, that if you're feeding kids the wrong subject matter and they're bored by it, you shouldn't be totally surprised if they throw a tantrum and they get a bit overactive and so on. But there is this tendency to react to disorderly conduct with a pill, and that can't be a good idea fundamentally. So it's this sort of thing that, yes, sometimes you do need it, but at other times not so. And it's this quick fix solution that people look for today. It's the quick fix that is the danger, when it's not the long-term solution that is something different and more complicated and more complex. And that's what I discovered about life generally, is that's part of the problem, that people work it out in their own minds and they just try and apply it generally, and then you get what you get, and you get what you pay. You reap as you, whatever it is, you sow as you reap, or reap as you sow. I don't know. You know what I'm getting at, I'm sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let me ask you a little bit about what we treasure. You talk a little bit in the book, in your play, about the destruction of what we treasure. Tell me how we as a people, we as a society, we as individuals should address this.
Well, I think here it's up to individual people, isn't it? It's not, I don't think that you can be wise for other people. I mean, I remember going back a long time, longer narrative poems bored me to tears. Now I get married and my dear wife introduces me to modern poetry. And suddenly Emily Dickinson I discover in America, actually. What a delight that was, discovering Emily Dickinson at a theater in America out of the blue. I lost myself an evening meal to hear it, because I still remember the occasion. And likewise, there are a lot of things you discover in life as you go along. But the idea that you can provide a national curriculum for everybody and provide for them what you think is right for them isn't a clever idea. I think there should be much more freedom of subject matter in the schools. And if you really think about it, I mean, I'll give you another illustration. Cooking. Now, in my retirement, some friends of mine encouraged us to learn to cook. Now, until we got round to getting a friend of ours who was a caterer to teach us to cook, I thought that roasting a chicken, for example, was an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. Now, in fact, I discovered it's not relatively easy, but it's quite pleasurable as well. Now, I think, when I was at school, this of course goes back a long time, I was introduced to woodwork and metalwork. You see, well, there are a lot of things in retrospect I could have done better, but one of the things that I think when I was at school, cooking used to be regarded as a female pursuit. Now there's a huge logic in teaching people to cook, teaching them to eat the right food, dieting the right foods and all the rest of it, and combating obesity at an early age. Now, all right, if you're studying for university education, you maybe haven't got time to slot that in. But if you're not going to university, wow, there's a huge opportunity to teach people a bit about diet and food and cooking and so on, which will stand people in good stead for the rest of their lives. Likewise, it's in relation to the arts. I mean, when you're at school, you're starting out life. Well, there's all the life ahead of you. So learning a bit about life and the world around in terms of its culture, again, stands you in good stead in the rest of your life. But if you're training for a scientific degree, maybe you haven't got all the time in the world to do that. So again, you need to have the variety, the spice of life. That's what you need to go for. And then you can, people get truly a stimulus to build something for themselves out of their own lives. I mean, that's really what education should be about, not just giving them a set route that they mass producing kids in a kind of, well, this was, of course, it's the Sir Fred Robinson approach to education, that it shouldn't be a mass produced assembly machine line that you know, that's what education should not be about. It's seeing that there are so many, I mean, the richness of life is there to be discovered, but it's so rich and so varied in its characteristics that you can't predetermine it for people. It's quite wrong to try and predetermine it for people. You've got to allow people to make their own discoveries, make their own well, as I say, this is again Fred Robinson. People what he puts it this way, he says that when kids are born, they're very creative, and education knocks it out of them. That is
absolutely. I mean, children are basically pressured into compliance their entire school years. If they're creative, if they're outspoken, if they're musical, if they like to move, all of that stuff is discouraged. Sit there, listen to me, and be quiet. That's the attitude of most schools, let's face it.
Well, as I say, well, I'm sure there are some people who are born teachers, and I don't want to denigrate them.
Yeah, not the whole profession, but unfortunately, it's sort of like, because of the way the system works, you have one teacher and maybe 30 pupils, that people have to sit there and be the recipients of the information, and there's not as much participation as we'd like to see.
The other thing, just going back to special needs, I mean, the thing that impressed me no end was that in this school, in the special school, Fredwin Haynes, who was the head teacher, he said to me, the one thing that we've got that mainstream schools haven't got is time. Now, when in my play Death of a Nightingale, there were kids from a special school taking part in the play. I wanted that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But I saw the rehearsals, and it was much more difficult for the director to produce the play because he was dealing with kids, and the rehearsals would have been that much quicker if it had been kids who were not with special needs, you see. Mm-hmm. But this is life. And but some teachers have the ability to deal with situations because they've got the patience and the time in order to do it. And the imagination as well. I mean, there's this lovely story which I came across a long time ago, where there was a kiddie who couldn't tie his shoelaces. Right. And the girl who was helping him put it to music and somehow was able to get it, you know. And I say there are certain things which, I mean, because I saw it, they registered on me. If I hadn't seen it, I wouldn't have believed it. I mean, there was a kiddie, I remember, he was actually driving his wheelchair with a wand attached to his forehead. And he used the wand to control his computer. Now, that didn't happen overnight. It was, you know, it took time to get that kid. I'll tell you another lovely story. Have we got time for another lovely story?
Oh, absolutely.
This is a lovely story. This is a story, I told you I belonged to Rotary. Well, there was a guy came to Rotary called, I still remember his name, Fred Raffle. He came with a guide dog for the blind, right? And when he came, he explained that he'd been at a school for the blind, where even though he's blind and with other kids who were blind, they played cricket. And they played cricket with a ball. The ball was actually a bag of peas that rattled. And they had a suitcase as the wicket, and they were able to play. But it went more than that. And this is what he was talking about. He actually went to the Caribbean and he followed cricket there. Now, you may not know cricket, but, you know, cricket's all about who scored how many runs and who's taken how many wickets and how many, all about records and so on. All these things are covered in Wisdom in a book. Well, he knew it all because it was his hobby. It was an enthusiasm, even though he was blind. Well, there was a test match between England and the West Indies. He was invited to commentate on it, even though he was blind. Because they fed him with the information, what was going on, and he could draw on all this local knowledge about the people who were playing and their records and so on. And he was able to enjoy himself. Now, this again is the sort of thing that can happen when people are growing up with people with similar difficulties to themselves and learn to deal with it. And this again was what happened in Barbara Priestman's school, that the older kids were a role model for the younger kids and helped them on their way. The other thing I remember about that school is that the carers said that the carers could sometimes help the kids more than the teachers could because they took them for toileting. and they could talk to each other better. So it's a world, if you just take a general statement, oh, these kids will be better in mainstream school, you miss out on all of that because you don't even see it. You don't see it exists. And the other thing you don't see it exists is the bullying that they have to endure and the consequences of the bullying. And you just think, oh, well, we can conquer bullying, or bullying is good for you, or something like that. Well, that's not the way to address these matters, is it? So you can see, I mean, it's the most stupid thing, this, for me. I mean, this has taken me over in a strange sort of a way, more than other things that I've done in my life, because I've suddenly seen things that are very meaningful to me, and I like to share them with others. And that's really why I keep chuntering on about it and rattle on about it and write about it and so on. And it's because I think that people do need to realize that they shouldn't tamper with a world that they don't know about. Too many people tamper and think they know best for other people when they really don't. They should be a little more humble with life. And that's one of the things that I guess I've discovered on my way through it. I know my, well, I think it's a common place to say it. You learn from your own mistakes as well as anything else. People should be prepared to acknowledge that and do that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it's a wonderful work. And before we go today, I want you to address one more thing, which is strength. You talk about this in your play. Where do you say our strength resides?
Do I say where our strength resides? I think our strength resides in ourselves when you feel that you are doing justice to yourself. That's what you've got to do. If you feel you really are doing justice to yourself and you're not beholden to other people. I think the tragedy is that if you've got a debt on your back and you're afraid to say boo to a goose because of that, that's not a good thing. The strength resides in you, not in anybody else. And that's where it comes from. And I've been very fortunate that I've been able to do things in my life which maybe others couldn't do. But again, you ride your luck, I suppose, as well. Say yes to life is, I think, the way I put it. And the other thing is that you see when things are there, obviously, as you go through life, not everything is easy or straightforward, and you've just got, I think, to be patient with it, but to try and turn a negative into a positive sometimes. That's part of it. But I think education is the key to a lot of things. It's a cliche to say that, and that's why I like to chunter on about this, because I think that the future depends upon the generation coming through now, and I think they need to ask themselves a lot of questions about the world that they're in, not just accept what they're being given by their present teachers. They need to challenge it a bit more than they do. I hope they have the courage to do that. But does that answer your question?
Oh, absolutely. And I think you're doing a great service. I think it's important that you're speaking out. I think it's important that you're writing, because particularly for the group of the people that you're advocating for, they really have no voice in society if it were not for people like you. So it's very important work indeed.
Well, thank you for that, because that's what I feel, that it's not easy for people to raise their voice today. I find rather the opposite, that people tend to feel they've got to keep their heads down. And you see, it's easy for me. I can do things when I'm retired, that it's not easy when you're working, and that's the part of the problem. But there we are.
All right, Alan, thank you so much for joining us today. Folks at home, you can learn more about Alan, his writing, his work, all on the website, deathofanightingale.com, deathofanightingale.com. You can learn about Alan, you can see his blog, you can purchase his book, and it is highly recommended for everyone who cares about children, and that should be everyone around the globe. Alan, thank you so much for joining us here today.
It's been a joy to be with you. Thank you. I wish you well with all the work you do too.
Thank you so much, sir. And I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time.
Okay. All the very, very best. Cheers.